Welcome to this presentation for businesses on country of origin labelling for food by the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. This presentation will provide guidance and general advice to you regarding the changed country of origin labelling requirements, but should not be regarded as legal advice. Individual businesses remain responsible for determining whether their labels comply with the new requirements. If you are unsure, it might be wise to seek independent legal counsel. This presentation will have two parts, beginning with details of the new requirements and exploring the government's online tool for origin labelling. The tool will help you to think about the kind of information you need to consider when labelling your products. The second part of the presentation will focus on compliance and enforcement and will be undertaken on behalf of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or the ACCC. A copy of this presentation is available online. The topics being covered in this presentation are extensively covered by guidance material available online. Details of where this guidance can be found will be covered later in this presentation. On 31 March 2016, the Council of Australian Governments agreed a package of proposed reforms for country of origin labelling for food sold in Australia. This presentation will cover the key elements of the Country of Origin Food Labelling Information Standard 2016, the amendments to the Australian Consumer Law, and resources that are available for business, for example, the Country of Origin Labelling online tool, a style guide, online frequently asked questions, fact sheets and ACCC guidance material. The new country of origin labelling requirements commenced on 1 July 2016. A 2-year transition period was provided, ending on 30 June 2018. For the remaining 15 months of the transition period, products can be labelled either according to the new rules or the rules currently in the Food Standards Code. From 1 July 2018, all products must be labelled in accordance with the new information standard. The origin rules currently in the Food Standards Code will be removed from that date. All stock in trade can continue to be sold, including after the transition period. The scope of food products covered by mandatory country of origin labelling requirements under the Food Standards Code is retained in the information standard. All foods that are currently required to label for country of origin under the Food Standards Code will continue to require a country of origin statement with or without a defined box. Food currently sold without an origin label will continue to not need a label. This includes food sold for immediate consumption or made on the premises where it is sold, in places such as restaurants, cafes, bakeries, as is currently the case. Food packaged, delivered and ready for consumption, such as home-delivered pizza, food sold in canteens and hospitals and the like, and food sold at fundraising events. As part of the market research undertaken when developing the reforms, consumers were asked to rank the importance of country of origin information for 19 food groups. The foods consumers most cared about were subsequently categorised as priority foods. However, there is no priority food list. Priority food is everything that is not on the non-priority food list. Australian priority foods are required to carry additional information in their label: the kangaroo logo, the bar chart, and accompanying text. Together, these three elements form the mark. All information for priority foods, Australian or imported, needs to be in a defined box. A mark comprises different elements depending on the country of origin claim. The rules for non-priority foods are no different to those under the Food Standards Code. Non-priority food is not required to provide the full mark, but does need to provide a textual statement of origin only. It does not need to be in a defined box. These products can carry the mark voluntarily, but must comply with the same rules for use as priority foods. For the remainder of this presentation, the focus is on priority foods and the marks. There is a significant change to the criteria for making a grown or produced in Australia claim under the new rules. If they are being used as part of the new mark, they can only be applied to products with 100% Australian ingredients. This change is based on the strong consumer preference for products using these claims to contain nothing less than 100% Australian content. The change makes grown in and product of Australia premium claims when used with the mark. For non-priority foods that do not voluntarily use the new mark, and for imported foods, the rules for making a grown in or product of claim are unchanged. So, for example, to be eligible for a product of New Zealand claim, only the significant ingredients of the food would need to be of New Zealand origin. All, or virtually all, processing would need to take place in New Zealand. Made-in claims apply to products last substantially transformed in a single country. Products using a made-in claim may or may not contain ingredients from the country claimed as origin. For example, a cake baked in Australia from entirely imported ingredients would still be eligible for a Made in Australia claim, as it was last substantially transformed in Australia. For products that cannot claim to have been grown, produced, or made in a single country, the packed-in claim applies. This claim should usually name the country where the product was packed and indicate that it is of multiple origins. For example, a package of mixed nuts might be packed in Canada, with nuts sourced from Canada, Brazil, and Australia. As the product was not substantially transformed, it could be labelled as packed in Canada, with ingredients of multiple origins. As noted, food can be described as having been made in a country if it underwent its last substantial transformation in that country. The definition of substantial transformation was recently amended by the Competition and Consumer Amendment Country of Origin Act 2017, which is now in force. The old definition allowed for changes in nature, form, and appearance to qualify as substantial transformation. Under the new definition, the imported ingredients must change nature, identity, or essential character to be considered substantially transformed. So, a food is said to have been substantially transformed if the end product is something fundamentally different from its imported ingredients. As the example on the slide notes, making mozzarella from imported ingredients in Australia would be considered substantial transformation, as the end product is fundamentally different to the imported ingredients. If imported cheese was only shredded and packed in Australia, it would not be substantially transformed, as the fundamental identity of the cheese has not changed. This definition aligns Australia with consumer expectations and international practice. The ACCC has developed guidance on what is and is not substantial transformation. When making a grown, produced, or made in Australia claim on a product, the mark shown on the screen must be used. There are three components to the mark: the logo, which indicates that the product was grown, produced, or made in Australia; the bar chart, which provides a visual indication of the Australian content; and a text statement which states if the food was grown, produced, or made in Australia, and the percentage of Australian content. The information standard requires that country of origin statements be distinct and legible. This is an overriding principle when it comes to what the mark should look like. There is a style guide available that provides suggestions of how best to meet this requirement. Some things to note: you can use any colour scheme you like, green and gold, black and white, or monochrome, so long as the mark meets the distinct and legible requirement. All three components must be displayed together inside a clearly defined box. The size and positioning of the label is not specified on packaged products. Unpackaged products can either be physically labelled, or the mark can be displayed in association with the product. If you are selling food online, the standard applies in the same way as it does to physical bricks and mortar sales. Unpackaged food sold online can either be physically labelled when delivered to the customer, be delivered with a physical label included with the food, or you can display the origin mark on your website in association with the product. Packaged products sold online must have a physical mark on their packaging. We would encourage you to consider displaying the origin mark on your webpage voluntarily as well. The Australian content claim made in the mark is a minimum claim. Your product may contain a higher amount of Australian content, but it cannot contain less than the amount stated in the mark. Because it is a minimum claim, you must always round percentages down to the nearest whole number. For example, if your product contains 77.7 Australian content, the text statement may claim only 77% Australian content or less. While a specific percentage can be named in the text statement, the bar chart can only be filled in 10% increments. So for a product claiming 77% Australian content, the mark should use a bar chart filled to 70%. The only exceptions are products claiming 95% or more Australian content and those claiming less than 10%. Products claiming 95% or more can use a bar chart filled to 95%. Products claiming less than 10% can use a bar chart filled to 5%. There are 3 types of packed in Australia marks. If the product has some Australian ingredients but does not qualify for a Made in Australia claim, then the mark will have the bar chart filled with a percentage of Australian ingredients and a packed in Australia from at least X% Australian ingredients statement. If the product has no Australian ingredients and the contents have multiple origins, it will indicate that it was packed in Australia with foods from multiple origins and include an empty bar chart. If the product has no Australian ingredients, but the contents were entirely sourced from a single country, it will have a single country of origin statement. An empty bar chart and packed in Australia statement is optional. Packed in Australia claims are not eligible to use the logo as they have not been grown, produced or made in Australia. Wholly imported products also need to identify the country of origin. Accordingly, the mark for wholly imported products does not include a logo as it is not of Australian origin. However, it must include a statement identifying the country of origin. The first example on the left relates to a food with a single country of origin, such as made in New Zealand. Other examples could be grown in France, product of Canada, or made in Brazil. It is important to note that foods packed in a different country, but still with a single country of origin, must name the country of origin, not just where it was packed. The middle example relates to food with multiple origins. If food from more than one country are packaged in a different country, the label must indicate where it was packed and that it is of multiple origins. For example, packed in Canada from imported ingredients, or packed in Brazil from multiple origins, or packed in the USA with ingredients from the USA and Canada. The third example on the right-hand side is optional and includes a bar chart and text. The label shows that a proportion of Australian ingredients, for example, made in Vietnam from at least 50% Australian ingredients. The statement must be in a clearly defined box for all packaged priority foods. For various reasons, some Australian foods are transported overseas for minor processing, not substantial transformation, and without the addition of non-Australian ingredients, and then transported back to Australia either packaged or to be repackaged. To show that although the food is Australian and that not all the processing has been undertaken in Australia, a new label which describes the minor processing has been introduced. This is different to foods that have been substantially transformed in a country. Minor processing does not change the identity, nature, or essential character of the food. For example, Australian macadamias that are shelled and packed in Fiji before being re-imported to Australia would need to state the overseas processing in the mark. If Australian food undergoes minor processing in another country, and food from one or more other countries is added during that process, then the food is considered to be of multiple origins and can no longer claim Australian origin. A prawn sent overseas to be shelled, crumbed with non-Australian ingredients and packed cannot claim Australian origin. It would use a packed-in claim and need to indicate that it is of multiple origin. If the food is sold unpackaged, the display will need to indicate multiple origins. The origin of specific ingredients can be included in the clearly defined box of most standard marks. If you call out the origin of a specific ingredient, all of that ingredient must come from the country named. For example, a pork small good made from Canadian pork might use the label "Made in Australia from at least 20% Australian ingredients with Canadian pork." Companies can voluntarily provide additional information about the origin of a food or drink product outside the country of origin mark, as long as the information is not false or misleading. Because many Australian food products have seasonal produce, the proportion of ingredients may vary throughout the year. To allow for this, new labels have been developed. The labelling includes "Made in Australia" or "Packed in Australia", that the ingredient source varies, the average proportion of Australian ingredients, and directions on where customers can find further information, such as a website or phone number. When you provide customers with further information on a website or phone, you must provide the actual percentage of Australian ingredients in that particular food product, rounded down to the nearest whole number, and time period used to calculate the average. This label also supplies information such as a barcode or other device, batch number, lot, date of manufacture, or date mark. This enables the customer to link to the ingredient information specific for that product. The supplier is responsible for providing the information via the method chosen, for example through their own website or customer contact centre. These labels do not allow for the origin of any specific ingredient to be highlighted. The average proportion can be calculated using 1, 2 or 3 year periods. The label is only valid for up to 2 years after the end of the period from which the average was calculated. Records must be kept to show how the average claim was calculated, as customers must be provided with a way to access information specific to the product they are purchasing. Records must also be kept of the varying Australian content for the period the average label is used. If you have a product with varying Australian content, you could alternatively choose to make a single minimum claim, reflecting the lowest year-round Australian content. However, your Australian content should never be below the minimum claimed at any point. You might also consider running different labels for the affected periods of the year if practical. The proportion of Australian content claimed in an origin mark is framed as an at-least statement. It is a minimum claim. This means that claims must always be rounded down to the nearest whole number. It is based on the ingoing weight of ingredients, and processing age should not be included in the calculation. On the screen is the calculation in its simplest format. In this example, we apply the calculation to a tomato sauce, made in Australia from local and imported ingredients. We simply sum the total ingoing weight of Australian content against the total ingoing weight of all ingredients, and then multiply the result by 100 to get a percentage of Australian content. In this example, the tomato sauce with 90% Australian content from our previous example is just one ingredient in a beef lasagna. When dealing with compound ingredients, that is, ingredients with 2 or more sub-ingredients, you need to consider the proportion of Australian content in the compound ingredient. And be sure to count only that proportion of the ingredient's ingoing weight towards the total Australian content. So here, the total Australian content is the sum of the beef, vegetables and the Australian content in the sauce and the pasta against the total ingoing weight of all the ingredients. So with the tomato sauce being 90% Australian content, 90% of the total amount of sauce used would count towards the Australian content of the final product. To allow for these calculations to be made, suppliers providing compound ingredients are required under the information standard to provide sufficient origin information to customers to allow them to make an accurate country of origin claim. The Australian Food and Grocery Council has added a country of origin labelling extension to the product information form for those that use the PIF. If you have any questions on this, please contact the AFGC directly. There are a number of different ways water can be accounted for when determining the country of origin of a food. Water added as an ingredient takes the origin of where it was collected or harvested. Water that reconstitutes dehydrated or concentrated ingredients or other components of food, including food additives, is taken to have the country of origin of that ingredient or component. For example, Water added to orange juice concentrate would take on the origin of the concentrate. Water that forms part of the liquid packing medium for a food is sometimes not to be counted when determining the proportion by weight of specified ingredients. A general rule of thumb when deciding whether the water in a liquid packing medium should be counted is to consider if the liquid is generally consumed. For example, the liquid in a tin of kidney beans isn't generally consumed, whereas the liquid in a tin of canned pineapple is. Where the packing medium contains more than just water, the other ingredients should be included in the calculation of Australian content. Only the water is exempt. There is nothing in the information standard preventing exporters from using their domestic label overseas. However, exporters will need to make sure they comply with the labelling rules in the importing country. Some businesses have expressed concern about using the bar chart on products exported overseas that shows the proportion of Australian ingredients. Food companies wanting to use the logo in any other way, with or without the bar chart on their products overseas, will need to obtain a licence through Australian Made Campaign Limited. Businesses will need to make a commercial decision about the cost-benefit of using their domestic labels or changing their label for export purposes and paying AMCL a fee. Please read the country of origin labelling guidance material that is available online. Business.gov.au has a variety of resources available, including a style guide, label library, frequently asked questions, and the online tool. The ACCC has made resources available on its website, and you can call its contact centre with queries regarding the application of the information standard. Additional information for importers is available from the Department of Immigration and Border Protection and the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources. Your industry association may also be able to provide assistance, and we understand there are some commercial offerings aimed at helping businesses with the country of origin labelling requirements. This presentation will now take you through a few product examples to show you how the online tool works and how it can help you to identify appropriate labels for your products. In our first example, we are looking at apple juice made from concentrate. There are 3 important questions you should know the answer to before you start using the tool. Firstly, where was the product last substantially transformed, and if any further processing takes place overseas? Secondly, is there any water content, and if so, what purpose does it serve? Thirdly, what is the proportion of Australian content in the product? Here we see that all the ingredients of the product are Australian, and all manufacturing occurred in Australia. The water used to reconstitute the concentrate is considered an ingredient and takes the origin of the concentrate it is reconstituting. So in this case, the weight of the water should be included in the calculation of Australian content. And now we're just going to take this through the online tool. The first page you will come to asks you to agree to the disclaimer before using the tool. The tool is a guide only. Exercise your own judgment and care when using the tool. Your response to each question will determine the label the tool recommends. The information provided through the tool should not be regarded as legal advice, and you should consider seeking your own legal advice as appropriate. And you tick the box and then click on Start Now. The initial series of questions in the tool are standard and relate to whether your food is in scope of the information standard. Firstly, we will assume that the apple juice will be sold at a physical store or market, online or from a vending machine. Before we click Next, you can see that this page and other web pages in the tool contain more information to help you understand and answer the questions. The tool also includes a save function that allows you to save your progress at any point when using the tool. You can save the link in your web browser bookmarks, or you can email yourself the link to return to the questionnaire later. For the next question, we will assume that the apple juice will be sold in different premises to where it has been grown, produced, made and packed. Then click on Next. For the next question, given that the product is apple juice, we assume that the product will be sold in a package. Click on Next. For this page, you're being asked to identify if the food is a priority or non-priority food. If the food is one of those listed under the first point, it is a non-priority food. You'll see here that there are help points throughout the tool. If you hover your mouse over the question marks, it will provide you with more details on the sorts of products covered by that category. Apple juice is a priority food and is not listed under the first point. Therefore, we will select not listed above, then click on Next. For the next question, we know that the apple juice was made in Australia, so we select Yes and then click Next. For the next question, we know that the apple juice is 100% Australian, then click Next. For the next question, we will assume that the product was not exported to an overseas country for processing before being re-imported to Australia. By selecting No, then click Next. This is the web page where you can preview and download the standard mark for the apple juice product. There are 7 different labelling options you can choose from which you feel best reflect your product. In this instance, we will use a custom label for Australian apple juice. You can preview the label in portrait or landscape mode before you download the label. There are 2 different label formats you can download. The PDF format are high quality files to be used if you wish to print the standard mark. Alternatively, if you wish to display the standard mark on screen, such as on a web page, you can use the PNG format. You can also download a PDF summary of your responses you have provided for your label by clicking on Summary. You enter the product name, in this case apple juice, then click on Download. You can then open or save the summary. The next example is tomato sauce, manufactured in Australia from local and imported ingredients. The tomato sauce includes water as an ingredient and has a mix of imported and local content. The Australian ingredients in the tomato sauce by ingoing weight are 1,350 grams, and the total ingoing weight of the ingredients in the sauce are 1,500 grams. To calculate the proportion of Australian ingredients, you divide 1,350 into 1,500 and multiply the result by 100. Based on the ingoing weight, the proportion of Australian content is 90%. Taking this example through the online tool, we'll assume that the tomato sauce will be sold at a physical store or market, online or from a vending machine. Next, we'll assume that the tomato sauce will be sold in different premises to where it has been grown, produced, made and packed. Next, we'll assume that the tomato sauce will be sold in a package. Next, we know that the tomato sauce is a priority food, so we select Not Listed Above. We know that the sauce was made in Australia, so we select Yes. We know that the ingredients in the tomato sauce are not all Australian, so we select No. We know that the tomato sauce is not fruit and vegetables in transparent packaging, so we select No. We know that the tomato sauce was grown or produced in 2 or more countries, one of which is Australia, so we select the second option. We know that the tomato sauce was last substantially transformed in Australia, so we select Yes. We know that the tomato sauce contains Australian ingredients, so we select Yes. We will assume that the tomato sauce contains a consistent proportion of Australian ingredients and select the first option. We will also assume that the food product was not exported to an overseas country for processing before being re-imported to Australia by selecting No. This is the web page where you can preview and download the standard mark for the tomato sauce product. We will choose the final custom option by entering 90% Australian ingredients with Australian tomatoes. Here is the landscape preview for that label. Here we have a beef lasagna manufactured in Australia from local and imported ingredients, including 2 compound ingredients, the tomato sauce from the previous example and some cooked pasta. The water content is a sub-ingredient in a compound ingredient and should be included in the calculation. With compound ingredients, remember to only include the proportion of Australian content in the compound ingredients in the total Australian content. As 80 grams of sauce with 90% Australian content is used, 72 grams of the sauce counts towards the total Australian content. Similarly, 175 grams of pasta with 36% Australian content is used, 63 grams of the pasta counts toward the Australian content. The total ingoing weight of the Australian ingredients in the lasagna is 255 grams, and the total ingoing weight of the food is 385 grams. Dividing 255 grams into 385 grams and multiplying the result by 100 gives you a percentage of Australian ingredients value of 66%. Taking this example to the tool, we'll assume that the lasagna will be sold at a physical store or market, online or from a vending machine. Next, we'll assume that the lasagne will be sold in different premises to where it has been grown, produced, made and packed. Next, we'll assume that the lasagne will be sold in a package. Next, we know that lasagne is a priority food, so we select Not Listed Above. We know that the lasagne was made in Australia, so we select Yes. We know that the ingredients in the lasagne are not all Australian, so we select No. We know that the lasagne is not fresh fruit and vegetables in transparent packaging, so we select No. We know that the lasagne was grown and produced in 2 or more countries, one of which is Australia, so we select the second option. We know that the lasagne was last substantially transformed in Australia, so we select Yes. We know that the lasagne contains Australian ingredients, so we select Yes. We will assume in this instance that the proportion of Australian ingredients varies over time by selecting the second option. We will also assume that we want to indicate that the content of Australian ingredients in the lasagne can vary over time by selecting Yes. We will also assume that the lasagne was not exported to an overseas country for processing before being re-imported to Australia by selecting No. This is the web page where we can preview and download the statement, the standard mark for the beef lasagne product. We will choose the final custom option by entering 66%, and here is the landscape preview for the label. In our final example, we consider a tinned 4-bean mix with both imported and Australian beans. Here, there is no single country of origin. While the chickpeas come from Australia, the other beans are sourced from different countries because tinning a product is not substantial transformation. This product has no single country of origin. The water content here is part of a liquid packing medium that is not generally for human consumption and so is completely excluded from the calculation of content. The ingoing weight of Australian ingredients is made up of the chickpeas and the salt in the brine. The total ingoing weight is all the beans plus the salt. When rounded down, this gives us a percentage of Australian content of 25%. We will assume that the 4-bean mix will be sold at a physical store or market, online or from a vending machine. We will also assume that the product will be sold in different premises to where it has been grown, produced, made and packed. We assume that the product would be packaged. We know that the product is a priority food, so we will select Not Listed Above. In this example, the food product was not grown or produced or made in Australia because not all ingredients are Australian, and the product was not last substantially transformed in Australia. The food is not fresh fruit and vegetables in transparent packaging. We know that the food or its ingredients was grown or produced in 2 or more countries, including Australia. We know that the food was not substantially transformed in Australia. We know that the food contains Australian ingredients. We also know that the food was not last substantially transformed in a single overseas country. We will assume that the food was packed in Australia. We will assume that the proportion of Australian ingredients does not vary over time due to seasonality and/or for other reasons by selecting the first option. This is the web page where you can preview and download the standard mark for the tinned 4-bean mix. We will choose the final custom option by entering 25% Australian ingredients with Australian chickpeas. Here is the landscape preview for the label. And now the presentation will move on to its second part, which will focus on compliance and enforcement and will be undertaken on behalf of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or the ACCC. In relation to country of origin labelling, there are things the ACCC can and can't do. The ACCC can provide information about rights and obligations, investigate alleged breaches of the laws it enforces, direct you to useful resources, refer you to other agencies as appropriate. The ACCC can, in some cases, permit conduct otherwise caught by the law by way of notification or authorisation. The ACCC can't tell you what label to use or approve your label, provide legal advice. More broadly, the ACCC also can't act on behalf of individual businesses, help you to resolve disputes, set prices for goods and services, for example, groceries and petrol, or tell you whether a breach has occurred. That is up to a court. So when is a food substantially transformed? A food will be substantially transformed in a country if it was grown in, produced in that country, or as a result of one or more processes undertaken in that country, the goods are fundamentally different in identity, nature, or essential character from all of their ingredients or components that were imported into that country. This means that a food that was grown in or produced in Australia may also claim to have been made in Australia. For foods with imported ingredients or components, a closer assessment is required of the processing undertaken in that country and its effect on the final product. A tip for businesses: the standard does not define what identity, nature, or essential character mean. If your business is trying to determine whether you have substantially transformed something, you should consider the ordinary meaning of those terms. Identity: the condition, character, or distinguishing features of a thing. Nature: the particular combination of qualities belonging to a thing by birth or constitution, native, or inherent character. Essential character: the necessary or indispensable qualities that distinguish one thing from others. What record should a business keep in relation to food labelling? If your business sells packaged food or unpackaged food with more than one ingredient, you must keep records supporting a country of origin claim for 12 months after the sale of the food item. Records should include information regarding the proportion of Australian ingredients, traceability information, contact details of who the products were received from or who they were supplied to, dates of transactions, batch or lot identification, volume or quantity of products, and relevant production records. You will be required to provide this information to the ACCC or another Australian consumer law regulator upon request. Failure to comply with the standard is likely to contravene the Australian consumer law and expose a party to potential enforcement action by the ACCC. If a business is compliant with the country of origin labelling requirements of the standard, they must still ensure that any country of origin representation made by the product, either express or implied, is not false or misleading. Pursuing businesses that engage in misleading or deceptive conduct or make false or misleading representations about their products is a priority for the ACCC. The maximum financial penalty for a breach of the Australian consumer law is $1.1 million for a body corporate and $220,000 for a person. Other orders a court may make include injunctions, compensatory orders, and corrective advertising orders. A breach of the Australian consumer law may also result in third parties who have suffered loss or damage taking legal action. Upon request by the ACCC or another Australian consumer law regulator, a business will be required to provide any information that they have on hand or are able to access at the time that substantiates their claim. The ACCC website has information including frequently asked questions and more detailed guidance. The ACCC has a small business information network to allow businesses to keep up to date on small business-related work undertaken by the ACCC. The ACCC also has an agriculture network that may be more suited to farmers and growers. The ACCC has free small business online education programs to help you to understand your broader obligations under the Australian consumer law, and includes more detailed information on when a claim is likely to be false, misleading, or deceptive. So that is the end of this presentation. The material presented to you today should be considered only general advice and guidance. It is not legal advice. Businesses remain responsible for determining whether their labels comply with the new requirements.